Hello everyone, welcome to the Green Man channel, hope you're all good and well. So for this Saturday's premiere, I'm counting down my top 10 new metal albums of all time. Yes, that's right, you heard me correctly, new metal. A subgenre of metal which is now pretty much disliked by a lot of, I'd say, metal fans. A lot of people generally look back with some embarrassment at this era these days. For me personally, this was the era of music that actually was quite an important pathway for me into listening to much more music generally. I mean, this got me particularly into heavy music and to listening to more classic rock, classic metal. It was through avenues of new metal and exploring new metal that helped path and guide me to the music I now listen to and have listened to for the past 20 or so years. So it's easy for me to, slag off new metal, as it were. But this subgenre of music brings back fond memories, even though now you can see why I can totally see why now. And it's hard for me to defend it, really, because, you had really cringeworthy lyrics in a lot of the songs. I often thought a lot of new metal bands were guilty of going for style over substance, over the music itself. A lot of them just putting out the same sorts of riffs and tracks and not really getting super creative. But in this top 10 list, that's where I've tried to be. I've gone for albums which have stuck with me over the years, albums which I still go back to, despite the fact I have to admit I don't go back to new metal very often, even now. It hasn't aged well, as lots of people, will say. It's a subgenre which hasn't aged very well. But these albums, they have an importance to me. They were, as I say, like gateway points into listening to heavier music. And there's a couple of choices in this list as well, which are albums I think you're less likely to know. I haven't gone for 10 albums which are which are all well known. I wanted to throw in at least a couple of albums which I think are very underrated or just forgotten about, that I thought were good new metal albums of this era. So we're talking like the late-ish 90s to I guess the mid-2000s with new metal. I think actually by 2004, 2005 it had mostly died out. But you still had new metal bands putting out albums at that point. So that's where we start with this list, actually, with my number 10, which is Dry Kill Logic's Of Vengeance and Violence, released back in 2006. So the new metal era is pretty much done and dusted by this point. But this third album from Dry Kill Logic, probably my favourite album from the band, which was slightly more leaning towards, I think, an alternative rock sound, but they still had their heaviness with some of these tracks in this album. I love the likes of 4039 and Confidence versus Consequence, I think it is, which feature really good guitar solos and breakdowns, and I just really love the sort of I just like this album. It's pretty hard hitting, it's quite memorable, I think, and I think it's a little bit underrated. I mean, I have seen the album not really get very good ratings and stuff, so I might be in a minority with this choice, picking this at number 10. But Dry Kill Logic's Of Vengeance and Violence, I actually think it's a pretty decent album. If you listen to it, sit down, listen to it all the way through. There's a few really good tracks on here, and I think it's kind of a cool album. I like this one. So that's my number 10, Dry Kill Logic, Of Vengeance and Violence. Number 9 is Drowning Pool with Sinner. Now, I totally get that this album wasn't exactly groundbreaking. It wasn't doing anything that was particularly new for its time, although I did like their use of the wah-wah effects with a lot of the heavy riffing. And the songs were just really catchy, really infectious. Once you hear them once, that's it. You're going to be singing along to them all day. But that's kind of what I liked about this Drowning Pool album. It was no nonsense. It was simple, but all the tracks hit you straight away. They were very memorable. And kind of the album had a charm to it, I think, a little bit with a few tracks. Obviously, Bodies is the most well-known song on this album, but there are a few other good ones. I think I quite enjoyed All Over Me. Pity Me was another really good song on this album. Sinner, the opening track, also pretty cool. So Drowning Pool, Sinner, you know what? I liked its straightforward approach. It's not the best album of the new metal era for me, but it comes in at number 9 because it was one of the albums I remember picking up and buying, and being an album that I really enjoyed back in the day. So it's come in here, number 9. Number 8, we've got a regular choice, I think, on people's top new metal albums lists. Certainly I see this regularly appearing in other YouTubers and other kind of music journalist lists. And I see Cold Chamber's Chamber Music And I really like this album actually by Cold Chain, but it's probably my favourite from them. Just full of hooks. And again, a bit like the Drowning Pool album, it's pretty no nonsense. But I think there's some dynamics here that work quite well in songs like Shock the Monkey. I also really like Tyler's song on this album too. And yeah, I think, you know, I can see why people pick this above some of their other albums at least. I do find chamber music to be the most compelling one to want to revisit out of all their discography for me. So yeah, Cold Chamber's chamber music comes here at number 8. Now at number 7, we have what is my hidden gem of the new metal era. And this album, again, it's not a perfect album. There's one or two rap-focused tracks on this album that I'm not really keen on, where rap is, you know, pretty much throughout the whole track. But this band, they are they were a British band. They were called Vacant Stairs. So this my number 7 is Vacant Stare and Vindication. That was their album. So they only released one album, and then that was it for the band. They no longer did any other albums. Sadly after this, because I think this band really had potential. So for me, the front half of this album is definitely the stronger half. I think it has most of the best songs on, most of the best songwriting in the first half of the album. The singer sounds good. He sings good. You know, I think good sort of good singer by the standards of new metal era, I think, as well. And I really enjoy this album. The hit single from this album, Head Start, was actually featured on Kerrang, a popular music channel certainly of that time. In the UK. I don't know if Kerrang was broadcast anywhere else, but I mean, really, really good, underrated new metal album, I think, from the early 2000s that I recommend. If you like new metal, or if you still don't mind going back to new metal, you should check this album out. It's a good album. Just as I say, a couple of the more rap-centric tracks, the rap-centric tracks I didn't quite enjoy as much, but this is worth a look and a listen. So that's Vacant Stare, Vindication at number 7. Now moving on to number 6 on my list, we've got Static X and their album Cannibal. Static X, of course, known for more of an, I think, an industrial sound for the most part on their earlier albums. But they changed slightly for this album. In fact, changed quite a bit to a more guitar-driven sound for their songs. And that worked in their favour for me, because this was an excellent album. That is one I can still enjoy now, and this was released quite some time really after new metal was big as well. This came out in about 2007. But yeah, this album Cannibal by Static X, lots of good tracks. Chemical Logic, Cuts You Up, Submission, Goat, just kind of really like tracks which don't hang around. You know, they're only 2 or 3 minutes long, so you don't get tired of them quickly, and they just pack that punch and leave you with a smile on your face, because there is some really good guitar work on this album as well. It's not just all about the, you know, the slightly more maybe commercial friendly sound of some of their earlier stuff. I do enjoy stuff like Shadow Zone, to be honest, and Machine and Wisconsin Death Trip, I think their first. I do enjoy some of that stuff, but yeah, I liked this album, I think, the best from the Static X catalogue. Next up at number 5, we've got a Korn album, but it's not the Korn album you were probably expecting, because I've gone for 2002's Untouchables. Yes, the album that I guess, you know, has some of Korn's really big hit. I mean, Here to Stay was a massive, massive song for me and hit. When that came out, I remember the video for it, the sort of, I think the TV screen and the kid putting his hand through it also. I can't quite remember it now, but, you know, had that bit of like lo-fi introduction and interference before it transitions into that huge, heavy bass sound that's characteristic of this album. It's a really loud sound to this album, really heavy riffs with a very loud bass. But that's what I love about this album. It is, yes, it's a new metal album for sure, but it's heavy as hell. It's heavy as hell, and it's nice and loud, but the riffs on it are great, the hooks. I think Jonathan Davis sounds really good on this album. I like his nuances in songs like Here to Stay, also in Thoughtless, the other single from one of the other singles from this album. I also enjoy Bottled Up Inside, Embrace. I like Embrace and that sort of that weird kind of noise it has in it, or effects in the background, and then that translates into the same sort of rhythm for the riff. It's just a great song, that one. I really like that one. And yeah, Untouchables, maybe, objectively, I don't know if I can say that really, but Untouchables, maybe not their best album. But for me, it was the album that actually got me into Korn. And I just enjoyed listening to this a lot. And I still listen to it and I still kind of enjoy it. On a certain level, Korn's Untouchables still really love the album. And it's kind of interesting that's the case. There aren't many new metal albums that I still love. But yeah, Korn's Untouchables is probably one of those. Next up at number 4, we have what is regarded as a new metal classic. And in a way, there are many that would probably say, well, it's kind of, System of a Down. This is System of a Down, Toxicity coming in at number 4. And you know what? It's System of a Down are kind of their own thing. And you can say that about some of these bands anyway, but of that era. System of a Down had their own sound, really, I think. They had, frenetic, manic guitar riffs and crazy rhythms, but they were sort of bunched together with more melodic moments and melodic choruses sung by Serge Tankian, the singer. And you can see why this was so popular and why it remains so popular today. System of a Down are one of the few new metal bands, and this album is one of the few albums that I still hear people talking about today. And I did a collaboration video on it last year with Children on a Couch and JC Rock and Metal Reviews, and it really is an album which is still recognisable today. Still people talk about it, and still tracks from this album I think sometimes get played as well by, I don't know about radio stations so much, but I still kind of hear them from time to time. And I think they're just one of these few bands that have managed to garner respect, and they've kept that respect over all these years because they were doing something that wasn't just new metal, it was original at the time, and it still sounds original now. So System of a Down, Toxicity had to be on my list, and it comes in at number 4. So number 3, another choice which wouldn't be fans of the band's number 1 choice. I say that most fans of the band's number 1 choice, I suspect. So number 3 is Mudvayne and The End of All Things to Come. So most people would choose LD50, Mudvayne's first album, I think, or was that their debut album? I should know that, but I think most people would choose LD50 as opposed to this album, The End of All Things to Come, right? But The End of All Things to Come, I loved this album when this came out. I absolutely loved it, and I still love it now. And it's because there's a real technicality to Mudvayne. They have, I think, of a lot of the new metal bands, they were on the more technical side anyway. Really inventive riffing. Chad Gray's vocals and delivery of vocals was extremely inventive and slick, and I can't think of many other new metal vocalists that I enjoyed hearing as much as him when he was delivering his lyrics and stuff. And they always stood apart from countless other new metal bands for me, Mudvayne. This album I just really loved. It's not the, maybe I should have chosen LD50, but this was the album again. This was the album I discovered the band with. And so very strong attachment to it. I remember seeing the song Not Falling on a music video. It was MTV or Kerrang! And I saw that and I was like, what the hell is this? This is fantastic. I want this album now. And yeah, The End of All Things to Come by Mudvayne. Great songs. Patient Mental, Skyring. Is it Skyring? Skyring, I think it's said. Not Falling, Version of the Truth. All those songs, great songs. There's lots on this album to enjoy. If you don't know this album, whether or not you like new metal, you should still listen to it because it's still a good metal album. Forget new metal with Mudvayne, just listen to them. They're a good band. Right, so next up, self-titled Slipknot is my number 2. Their debut album from 1999. I think I got around to listening to this one the year after. This was one of my first ever metal albums. And I had not heard anything like this. I'm saying this again, but I had not heard anything like Slipknot before. And it blew me away. I was like, what the hell is this? This is really raw, it's really tribal, it's really aggressive. But I realised after the first few tracks, I absolutely loved it. I loved what I was hearing. And rather like the album that's number 1 on my list, this is just one of those albums that because it was one of the first I ever bought on CD, it's just one that cannot be anywhere else but near the top of my list. If you have a list of albums that you are thinking about and you cannot remove the fact that you have that attachment to the album, that it was so important to you that it was your launch pad basically to get into other things. You know, these top two albums, I can't ignore that for. These, I still love them now as well, so it's just like, it has to be Slipknot's self-titled album coming in at number 2 here. And you will all know what my number 1 is. You'll all know what my number 1 is because I've talked about it before on The Green Man. I say you'll all know. If you're new to the channel, you maybe won't know, but Hybrid Theory by Linkin Park is my number 1 new metal album of all time. And it's because it just sounds great now, like it used to. And I still go back to this album more than all other 9 albums on my list. More than the Slipknot self-titled, more than the Mudvayne album, more than System of a Down. This is the album I still go back to the most. It is Linkin Park's Hybrid Theory. Every song on the album is pretty much a banger, and that's why it's my number 1, I think, as well. Production is fantastic, and Mike Shinoda and Chester Bennington's interplay of rap and clean singing is the best, I think, that there was in the subgenre of new metal. I don't think that Mike and Chester's combination could be beaten by many other new metal bands. It just worked perfectly. I think they were both great. Mike as a rapper and Chester as a singer, just an impossibly brilliant combination of voices and delivery of those songs, along with great production and good riffs and hooks and everything, all of that. That's my number 1, Hybrid Theory by Linkin Park. Hope you enjoyed this list. Do let me know your top 10 new metal albums in the comments. I look forward to reading those. Otherwise, from me, as always, till next Saturday's premiere, and I'll see you probably then for my, that's going to be my horror films that I've watched recently or watched for the first time tier list. Got there eventually with that one. So join me there for that. Otherwise, from me, bye for now.